It always starts the same way. She looks not at who someone is, but at who she imagines they might become. There's that flicker in her eyes, hope or hunger. The feeling of being seen, but something darker lurks beneath. Being measured, assessed, scanned like a blank canvas waiting for her to paint a masterpiece. But the masterpiece was never the person standing there. It never was. And Carl Jung warned about this, with the sharp surgical precision of a man who spent his life staring into the psychological abyss of the human soul. Jung discovered something terrifying about relationships that most people refuse to acknowledge, something so uncomfortable that society has buried his warnings for decades. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video. You help keep alive this search for the stories the world tries to bury. Jung's entire life was devoted to mapping what he called the unconscious, that part of the human mind that operates silently beneath awareness. Through his research, he uncovered a disturbing pattern that repeats itself in relationships across cultures and centuries. Women don't just fall in love with men. They fall in love with ideas of men, with fantasies, with projections. And the most terrifying part, most don't even realize they're doing it. The illusion feels real. The belief that she's choosing the actual person standing before her. But what's actually happening is the selection of a version created in her own mind, a psychological puppet who exists to play a role in her private movie. And when the performance stops fitting the script, she changes the actor, not the story. Jung called this projection the animus, the inner masculine image that lives inside every woman. When that animus remains immature, undeveloped, or unchecked, it becomes a tyrant. It becomes the unseen force that makes women chase dangerous men and reject good ones. It makes them argue without reason, dominate without wisdom, and moralize without accountability. Jung didn't sugarcoat this reality. He described it as a spiritual possession, a state where the woman herself becomes unaware that she's no longer acting from her own consciousness, but from the shadowy grip of her inner masculine fantasy, and men fall for it because nobody taught them to spot it. The confusion between being desired and being known, the mistake of equating being chosen with being understood, believing her words when she says someone is different, when in reality they're just the latest face cast to fulfill a role she's been rehearsing since childhood. When the fantasy collapses, when the mask slips, confusion, betrayal, and humiliation follow, wondering what went wrong. But nothing went wrong. The performance just stopped being convincing in someone else's play. Jung warned that the only way out of this psychological theater is through what he called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole within oneself. And here's the uncomfortable truth: most men never start that journey. Society trains men to chase approval, seek validation, to let women define their worth. As long as this continues, the same role gets played over and over again, with replacement every time the audience gets bored. Individuation isn't glamorous, it's brutal. It requires confronting the buried parts, the weak, insecure, broken pieces. It demands stopping the blame game and starting self-examination. Jung knew something that most men will never understand. Becoming a man doesn't happen through being chosen. It happens by choosing oneself. Worth isn't earned through affection. It's earned by standing alone, fully awake, responsible, fully alive. A man who has faced his own unconscious cannot be seduced by projection. He is no longer a puppet in someone else's fantasy. He becomes the author of his own reality. Jung observed that the greatest tragedy of modern men isn't rejection, it's the willingness to mold themselves into whatever shape they believe will be accepted. Society calls it compromise, partnership, love. But Jung had a different name for it: self-betrayal. He warned that men who ignore their own psychic development become slaves to feminine projection, bending themselves like wet clay into shapes demanded by women who don't even know their own true desires. The transformation from men into masks, smiling, nodding, agreeing, performing until the memory of who they were before the mask fades completely. And women sense this transformation. They sense it more than anyone could imagine. The very thing men think will make her love them, obedience, predictability, availability, becomes the very reason she loses attraction. Why? Because the feminine instinct, Jung taught, isn't drawn to comfort. It's drawn to mystery, to risk, to the man she cannot fully define or control. The moment someone makes themselves fully known, without boundaries, without backbone, they don't become more lovable. They become invisible, disposable, replaceable. Yet here's the paradox that keeps most men enslaved. The fear of being alone exceeds the fear of being fake. The preference for losing oneself over losing her. The choice to live in a role, rather than face the terror of standing without applause. But Jung taught that until a man embraces solitude, he will never be free. He wrote that individuation is a path not for the faint-hearted because it requires dying before death, letting the false versions burn so something real can finally emerge. But there's something nobody wants to say out loud. Individuation is lonely, terrifyingly lonely. Walking that path means beginning to see things that cannot be unseen. Recognition of the games people play, the masks they wear, the lies they tell themselves just to feel safe. When attempts are made to share these insights, mockery follows. Labels of cold, arrogant, too serious, accusations of being the problem. But the problem isn't the person seeing clearly. The problem is being the mirror. And people hate mirrors when they show something they don't want to face. Jung knew this well. He spent decades studying patients terrified to confront their own shadow, the dark, rejected parts of their psyche they refused to acknowledge. Women, Jung warned, are often raised in cultures that reward them for avoiding that confrontation. They're told they're pure, emotional, intuitive, and complete just as they are. But Jung didn't buy it. He wrote that the greatest danger to women was their unconscious animus, the voice inside them that speaks with false certainty, false authority, and moral superiority. He warned that if a woman doesn't face and integrate this inner masculine force, she becomes its prisoner, projecting it onto every man she meets, blaming them for the very war she refuses to fight within herself. And men keep thinking they'll be the savior, the exception, that loving hard enough will finally make her choose them for who they really are. But that's not how projection works. Jung taught that projection is a thief. It steals reality and replaces it with illusion. Until both men and women wake up from that illusion, they're destined to repeat the same tragedy over and over again. Each one blaming the other, never realizing they're both dancing with shadows. The most ironic twist of all, the woman who once saw someone as her hero will one day see them as the enemy. Not because they changed, but because they failed to fulfill the fantasy she cast upon them, and she won't even realize she's doing it. Jung called this psychological betrayal inevitable when neither party takes responsibility for their own inner world. There was no lie, no betrayal, just disappointment of the invisible character invented in her unconscious mind. The person was never that character to begin with, and that's why resentment follows, not for flaws, but for failing to live up to the myths she never revealed they were hired to play. Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." Nowhere is this more true than in romantic relationships. Both men and women enter them not as whole individuals, but as walking projections, dragging unlived fears, unmet needs, and unresolved childhood wounds into the arms of another person they barely understand. Society calls it love. Jung called it possession. And like people hypnotized, the same trap gets walked into repeatedly, thinking this time will be different. But it never is, because the most terrifying question hasn't been asked. What if the pattern is self-created? The temptation exists to blame women, to call them manipulative, deceptive, shallow, but Jung would look directly into someone's eyes and ask, and why did they allow themselves to be chosen by that woman in the first place? The man who refuses to confront his own inner feminine world is destined to be a slave to hers. There are no victims here, only volunteers. The choice to play the fool, the choice to be the actor in her private myth, because facing emptiness and lack of wholeness was far more terrifying than playing a part in someone else's fantasy. This is where most people stop listening, because this is where comfort ends and responsibility begins. Jung didn't offer cheap solutions. He didn't provide 3 steps to greatness. He gave the brutal lifelong task of self-confrontation. sitting alone in the silence of one's own mind until the illusions start to crack, until the voice saying worthlessness without her begins to die. That voice will fight for its life. It will insist on need, on incompleteness without her, that no man can live without feminine validation. But Jung's work whispers something more dangerous. The man who can stand without her, without approval, without applause, without being needed, is the man who is finally free. Free from projection, free from performance, free from the tyranny of living as someone else's idea of a man. When that place is reached, the transformation isn't to coldness or distance, it's to reality, rooted, grounded, fully alive in one's own skin. Paradoxically, that's when women feel most drawn, not because of need, but because of its absence. The smile that follows isn't heartless, but understanding. Understanding that she's on her own journey too. That she must face her own animus, wake from her own illusions, and that work cannot be done for her. She cannot be saved from herself. The only option is to follow Jung's example, walk the path so fearlessly that it becomes a living mirror, reflecting truth back to everyone who dares to look. Most will turn away, but a few rare souls will express gratitude. That's the difference between being loved for the role played and being respected for the man become. When that moment arrives, when the realization hits that performance is no longer necessary, something strange becomes noticeable. People become uncomfortable. They sense it, even if they can't name it. The weight of presence unsettles them because the predictable categories they used to feel safe no longer apply. Jung warned that the individuated man is not welcomed by society. He is feared, misunderstood, labeled as distant or arrogant. But the truth is far more threatening, untouchable, unbribable, unmanipulable, because the game is seen through clearly. The irony becomes apparent. The very people who once begged for attention, validation, approval, begin to resent the lack of need for theirs. Women, especially those still possessed by the fantasy of the perfect man, will accuse of emotional unavailability. They'll claim too much thinking, too analytical, too distant. But what they really mean is that control is no longer possible. The stage has been abandoned. The script is no longer being read. Without that script, they don't know what to do because the transformation from character to man is complete. Jung once joked that the gods have become diseases, that what ancient cultures called divine possession, modern psychology calls neurosis. Men chasing validation are among the most spiritually sick of all. The romantic declarations of "I'd do anything for her" or "she's my everything" aren't love. They're a refusal to carry one's own soul. It's easier to project it onto a woman and make her the carrier of hope, meaning, purpose, because if she carries it, personal responsibility disappears. But here's the brutal twist. When she realizes she was never designed to carry another's soul, she will drop it. She must drop it because no woman, no matter how loving, can hold the weight of a man who refuses to hold himself. When she drops it, betrayal seems to follow. But gratitude should replace that feeling because in that moment when the illusion collapses, the truth finally appears face to face. The work of becoming a man was never hers to do. It was always a personal responsibility. In that raw moment of clarity, two choices exist. Blame her. Become bitter. Join the angry chorus of men pointing fingers at women, mocking them, resenting them, swearing them off like cowards who never dared face their own emptiness. Or do what Jung would have demanded, turn inward and start the lonely, terrifying, liberating work of individuating, becoming whole without needing someone else to complete the picture. The truth is stark. The woman being searched for out there is a reflection of the abandoned part within. Until that part is faced, every relationship will be a performance, every connection a transaction, every love a lie. But when it is faced, when the inner feminine is integrated, transformation occurs into a man who no longer needs to chase women. No running after them, no manipulation, no performance, just standing still, fully rooted in authentic identity. From that place, something miraculous happens. The attraction is no longer toward women who want a character. It's toward women who want truth. Recognition comes instantly when it happens because she won't demand performance. She won't try to change the script. She won't fall in love with fantasy. She'll stand raw and real, not as a goddess looking for worship, but as a human being willing to walk her own path alongside another. No masks, no projections, no games. When the meeting occurs with the real her, not the fantasy, the difference is instantly visible. No grand declarations flood the interaction. No treatment as the missing puzzle piece. No seduction with the language of completion, because she isn't looking to be completed. She isn't looking to be saved. She's done the work, met her own shadow, confronted her own animus, burned through her own illusions. That's why performance isn't needed. Carrying her soul isn't required. She stands there whole within herself, making eye contact, not as a man to be molded, but as a man finally ready to be met. In that meeting, there's no desperation, no clinging, no performance, only truth. And that truth, Jung taught, is the rarest and most dangerous kind of love, the kind that demands nothing but offers everything, because it's not born of need but of freedom. Freedom to choose, freedom to walk away, freedom to stand together without illusions, without masks, without fear. But fair warning, most will never experience this because most will quit before reaching that destination. Settling for the performance, for the fantasy, for the temporary thrill of being seen as someone they're not, because facing who they truly are still feels unbearable. But for those with courage, the brutal, gut-wrenching courage to keep walking, to keep standing alone, to keep stripping away every false layer built to earn approval, eventually the edge of something terrifyingly beautiful appears. Self-discovery awaits. When that discovery happens, women will no longer be the source of identity. They will no longer be the mirror used to feel masculine. They will become something else entirely. Partners, not prizes. Mirrors, not mothers. Allies, not saviors. And love will flow not from need, but from choice, from strength, from wholeness, from a place that knows without apology exactly who they are. Carl Jung didn't leave a map to follow. He left a warning that every man who refuses to confront himself will become a slave to the projections of others, especially the projections of women. But he also left a challenge, to walk the path of individuation, to stop blaming women for volunteered roles, to stop seeking wholeness in others' eyes, to stop waiting to be chosen. The man who chooses himself fully, unapologetically, relentlessly becomes someone who cannot be controlled by fantasy. He cannot be seduced by performance. He cannot be reduced to a character in someone else's script. He becomes the author of his own life. Have you ever noticed this pattern playing out around you? What other psychological truths might be hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered? What stories do you think deserve to be explored on this channel? If this revelation has made you think differently about relationships and personal growth, then you're ready for what comes next. The rabbit hole goes much deeper than most people imagine. Subscribe now and don't miss the next exploration into the uncomfortable truths that shape our reality. If this has already made you question everything you thought you knew, wait until you see what will be revealed in the next video. Subscribe now and Dan think you'll want to miss it.